In the rush of a winter morning, a billionaire CEO, Evelyn Marlowe, stepped toward the elevator, her mind on boardrooms and battles, just as a single-father Jack Mercer burst through the lobby doors with his daughter's small hand in his. Their worlds collided in an instant. Was it chance, or something that had been quietly waiting for years? Neither knew then that this brief interruption would become a doorway to healing, to trust, and to the kind of love that arrives not with thunderclap, but with the steady warmth of a second chance. The lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and winter air. Outside, the storm had moved in without ceremony. Snow swirling like a shaken globe, the city dulled to a hush beneath it. Jack kept his grip on Emily's mittened hand as they crossed the slick tiles, his boots leaving dark prints that trailed from the revolving door. The lunchbox, wrapped in her red scarf because he'd forgotten a bag, swung from his other hand. He was already late for his delivery. But Emily's face had crumpled when she realized she'd left in the van, and that had settled the matter. At the far end of the lobby, a line of brushed steel elevator doors gleamed under warm lights. One of them slid open with a muted chime. Evelyn Marlowe stepped forward, coat draped perfectly over her shoulders, her scarf a pale thread of color against the navy wool. Her eyes were down, scanning the phone in her hand as she moved with the kind of speed that didn't waste motion. She had a meeting upstairs, a boardroom full of voices waiting to test her patience, and the elevator was her brief corridor of silence before the performance began. Jack and Emily reached the threshold just as she did. The collision was clean, his shoulder against hers, the lunchbox jolting between them. Evelyn's phone wobbled in her grip. Jack caught it without thinking, his callous fingers brushing the leather of her gloves before he handed it back. "Sorry," he said, steady but not rushed. "It's fine," she answered, though her tone carried the clipped edges of someone with no time to spare. Emily peered around her father's arm, blue eyes wide. "You smell like cinnamon," she said in the unguarded way children had. The faintest crease softened Evelyn's mouth. "Do I?" she asked, tilting her head. Jack exhaled through his nose, an almost smile flickering before he pressed the lobby button again, even though it was already lit. Evelyn stepped in first, Jack and Emily following. The doors slid closed, sealing them into a narrow space of brushed steel and muted lighting. The elevator shuddered once. Then again, a pause long enough for the numbers to freeze on the panel. Emily's small fingers tightened in Jack's hand. "Just a moment," Evelyn said, crouching slightly so her eyes met Emily's. "These old lifts get nervous in the cold." Her voice was even, unbothered, and Emily nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing. Jack watched her, not the polished CEO image, but the way she held the moment steady without making it more than it was. A metallic hum signaled the elevator's recovery, and the numbers began their upward climb. Evelyn straightened, and something slipped from the folio under her arm, a pen, sleek and silver, its cap engraved with initials. Emily bent before Jack could, picking it up and holding out with both hands. "Thank you," Evelyn said, accepting it with a small incline of her head. "That's not something I like losing." Emily smiled, the sort of smile that came without calculation, and for a heartbeat Evelyn felt the unfamiliar warmth of being seen without agenda. The doors opened to her floor. She stepped out, glancing back only once. Jack stood where she'd left him, Emily leaning against his side, scarf still wrapped around the lunchbox like a gift waiting for the right hands. The doors closed. Evelyn turned toward the long stretch of hallway, her reflection in the darkened glass ahead carrying a shadow of the scene she'd just left. It was gone by the time she reached the boardroom, but the scent of cinnamon. 2 days later, Jack was back in the same lobby, boots shedding the crust of morning snow onto the black mat by the door. The delivery forms were folded into his jacket pocket, his gloves tucked into his belt. Emily trailed beside him, balancing on the thin line between tiles, as if it were a tightrope. She'd begged to ride along since school was closed for the storm, and he hadn't the heart to tell her no. The delivery desk was busy, phones ringing, pens scratching over clipboards. Jack set the parcel down, and began signing the log when Emily's quiet gasp drew his eyes. Across the marble, Evelyn Marlowe emerged from a meeting room, speaking low to a man in a charcoal suit. Her hair was pinned higher today, her coat open over a gray dress, and she carried the same leather folio tucked under her arm. Emily waved before Jack could stop her. Evelyn's expression softened just enough to be visible before she inclined her head in return. She didn't stop, but her gaze lingered on Emily for a heartbeat longer than necessary, as if memorizing the exact color of her mittened hands. The next encounter came without warning. Jack was in the lobby again that Friday, scanning the directory for a client's office, when Evelyn stepped off the elevator. She carried 2 heavy archival boxes, her usual precision dulled by the awkward weight. Before he thought about it, Jack crossed the space and took them from her. "You'll hurt your wrists carrying them like that," he said. She blinked, as though unaccustomed to unsolicited help. "Thank you." Emily appeared at his side, peering into the top box. "Are those books?" "Contracts," Evelyn said, adjusting her scarf. "But they're heavy like books." Emily wrinkled her nose. "Books are better." Evelyn's answering laugh was quick, unguarded, and it carried a note Jack had not yet heard from her. By the following week, their paths had crossed enough times that the space between them felt less like chance and more like something unspoken guiding their steps. On a Tuesday afternoon, snow began falling hard and sudden, the kind that erased the skyline in minutes. Jack finished the delivery just as the worst of it descended, Emily beside him with damp hair escaping her hat. The lobby doors whooshed open ahead of them, and Evelyn stepped out, checking the street with a faint frown. Her car was nowhere in sight, snow already clinging to her lashes. "Storm came in fast," Jack said as they met near the entrance. "Apparently faster than my driver." Her voice carried no complaint, only observation. She glanced at Emily's scarf, darkened with wet patches, and unlooped the pale wool one from her own neck. "Here, yours is soaked." Emily hesitated, glancing at Jack. He nodded, and she let Evelyn wind the scarf gently around her. The wool was soft, faintly scented with cedar and some floral note Jack couldn't place. "That's better," Evelyn murmured. They waited out the worst of the flurry, in the warmth of the lobby. Jack kept one eye on the street, the other on Emily, who was now perched on the edge of a bench, sketchbook in her lap. Evelyn stood nearby, curious. "May I see?" she asked when Emily tilted the page toward her. It was a quick pencil sketch. Evelyn in her coat, scarf tucked high, one hand holding the pen Emily had noticed that first day. The likeness was more in feeling than in lines, but it was unmistakable. "This is lovely," Evelyn said, a quiet sincerity in her tone. Emily flushed under praise. "You can have it if you want." Evelyn hesitated, then accepted, folding the page carefully. "I'll keep it safe." Jack watched the exchange without speaking, aware of something delicate passing between them that didn't belong to him, yet mattered all the same. When the snow eased, Evelyn's driver arrived. She returned the scarf to Emily. But the storm that week came with sleet instead of snow, hammering the streets into a slick sheen. By late afternoon, the school nurse was on the phone, her voice tight with concern. Emily had developed a fever, pale and shivering, and Jack needed to come right away. He left the job half-finished, the van idling at the curb, wipers squealing against the frozen windshield. By the time he reached the school, the light was already sinking toward evening, turning the wet streets into mirrors. Emily was small and heavy in his arms, her head against his shoulder, her breath hot against his collarbone. He wrapped her scarf twice around her and carried her straight to the van. The tires spun on the icy slope, leaving the lot. He coaxed them forward, but halfway down the block the wheels lost all grip. The van slid toward the curb and shuddered to stop, rear and angled out into the street. Jack swore under his breath, checked Emily's face, still flushed, eyes half-lidded, and climbed out into the wind to see if he could push them free. Through the blur of sleet, the glass front of Evelyn's building rose across the street, light spilling out in soft gold. Inside, she was crossing the lobby toward the elevator when she caught sight of him, hunched against the wind, child in his arms. Something shifted in her stride. She pushed through the doors into the weather, coat unbuttoned, scarf trailing. "You'll freeze out here," she said, voice firm but not sharp. "Come inside." Jack started to protest, but Emily stirred, murmuring at the change in air. He followed Evelyn back through the glass, the warmth hitting like a tide. The doorman glanced up, startled, but Evelyn's look was enough to silence any question. She led them to a corner of the lobby where a deep leather chair sat beneath a lamp. Jack eased Emily into it, pulling off her wet scarf. Evelyn knelt, unwinding her own scarf and wrapping it gently around the child's neck. The pale wool dwarfed her small frame. "She's burning up," Evelyn murmured. "I'll get her home," Jack said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Let her rest here until you can." Evelyn's tone brooked no argument. She moved to the reception desk, spoke quietly to the attendant, and returned with a glass of water. Emily's hands curled around it, eyes fluttering open for the first time since they'd left the school. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," Evelyn returned, her smile small but steady. "You gave your dad quite a scare." Emily leaned back, a ghost of a smile flickering before she rested her head against the chair. Jack sat on the edge of the opposite chair, the weight of the day settling heavy in his shoulders. "She's usually tougher than this," he said. "They always are until they're not." Evelyn's eyes softened, a flash of something private moving there before she looked away. They spoke in the low tones of people waiting for something beyond their control. Jack told her, reluctantly, that Emily's mother had been gone for years. Evelyn admitted her own daughter was grown now, living far away. "It's different when the house is quiet," she said. Emily stirred again, rummaging weakly in her backpack until her fingers found a small wrapped candy. She held out to Evelyn. "Try it. It's my favorite." Evelyn hesitated, then unwrapped it and let it rest on her tongue. The sweetness bloomed unexpectedly. "It's not terrible," she said, her mouth tilting just enough to make Emily laugh, a small, warm sound in the hush of the lobby. By the time Jack's brother arrived with his truck, the sleet had softened to rain. Jack lifted Emily into his arms, murmuring thanks, but Evelyn stopped him just long enough to adjust the scarf around the girl's neck. "Keep it," she said when he tried to hand it back. Outside, the wind caught his coat, but for the brief moment before the truck door closed, Jack saw her standing in the glass doorway, the lobby's gold light spilling around her. She didn't wave, but the look in her eyes stayed with him all the way home. A week passed before Jack saw her again. The days have been a patchwork of thaw and frost, the sidewalks alternately slick and gritty, the air holding that brittle edge that kept people's heads down and steps quick. Emily was back to her usual self, energy restored, scarf still looped once around her neck in defiance of a suggestion to leave at home. She claimed it was warmer than any other she owned, and he didn't argue. The delivery that morning was routine. Form signed in the van, boxes labeled in thick black marker, but as he turned into familiar marble lobby, he saw her waiting. No coat draped just so, no phone in hand, no eyes already elsewhere. She was simply standing by the wide windows, watching the light fall over the street. Emily spotted her first and let go of Jack's hand, darting across the floor to wrap small arms around Evelyn's legs. Jack's breath caught at the sight, at Evelyn's surprised laugh, at the way she bent to meet the hug instead of standing in that polished distance. She seemed to wear like a second skin. "I was expecting you," Jack said as he reached them. "I owed you something," she replied, holding out a thermos. It was the dent near the lid, and the faint scratch in the metal exactly where he remembered, but polished, gleaming, and warm to the touch. "Cinnamon coffee," she added, as though the most natural offering in the world. Emily tugged at her bag and produced a small sketch pad. "This is for you," she told Evelyn. "The paper's better than the one I used before. Daddy says it doesn't smudge as much." Evelyn accepted it carefully, fingers brushing the rough edge of the cover. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than Jack had heard before. They stepped outside together, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and melting snow. Evelyn walked between them, her hand resting lightly on Emily's shoulder. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the city had chosen to hold its breath. Emily filled the silence with talk of school, of how the art teacher had shown her how to shave properly, of the dog she'd seen tied up outside the bakery that morning. At a corner where the light was slow to change, Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and drew out the silver pen. "For safekeeping," she said, pressing it into Jack's hand. "You've proven you don't lose things worth keeping." The weight of it was more than metal. It was a line drawn from that first morning to now, a circle closed without fanfare. Jack turned it in his palm, meeting her gaze. There was nothing playful there, no casualness to soften the moment. Emily was watching them both, her small hand slipping from his to hers without hesitation. The signal changed, and they crossed together, the world reduced to the sound of their boots on damp pavement and the faint hiss of passing tires. When they reached the corner where their paths would part, Jack stopped. The air between them felt charged, but not in the sharp way it had that first morning. It was a softer current, one that had been building quietly, patiently. He stepped close enough for the city to blur the edges, rested his forehead lightly against hers. No words passed. Her eyes closed, and the faintest exhale left her lips warm against the winter air. Emily pretended to study a snowflake melting on her glove, a conspirator's small mercy. Jack stepped back first, though his hand stayed on her arm for a moment longer. "Thank you," he said, though they both knew it meant more than the coffee, more than the pen, more than the scarf still wound around his daughter's neck. Evelyn's reply was just a nod, but her eyes held a kind of promise that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. They parted without hurry. Emily skipped ahead toward the van, humming under her breath, and Jack glanced back once to see Evelyn still at the corner, her gaze following them. Later that afternoon, in her office, Evelyn set the sketch pad on her desk and propped Emily's first drawing against the thermos. The pen lay beside them, gleaming in the pale winter light. Beyond the glass, snow began to fall again, not the fierce kind, but the soft, steady drift that could cover a city if given enough time. She didn't reach for her phone or her email. She simply sat for a moment, the quiet pressing in like a warm room after a long walk in the cold, and thought of a man with callous hands, a girl with blue eyes, and the way both had managed, without asking, to step into her life and leave the door open. Love had come not as a whirlwind, but as a steady hand, a shared smile, a scarf passed from one heart to another. It was proof that even in the coldest seasons, warmth can find its way in, and that second chances often arrive when we least expect them. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more heartfelt tales.